Welcome to Modern Anarchy, the podcast exploring sex, relationships, and liberation. I'm your host, Nicole.
I tried to keep her quiet, but she's screaming inside of me. I tried to keep her hiding, oh, shut up. I tried to keep her quiet, but she's a wild, wild woman.
On today's episode, we have psychedelic activist Tony Moss. Join us for a conversation exploring the relational impact of psychedelics. Together, we talk about the importance of examining your set and setting, seeing your relational patterns from a new perspective, and finding your own spiritual empowerment with psychedelics. Hello, dear listener, and welcome back to Modern Anarchy. Before we get into today's episode, I want to say a big thank you to our newest Patreon supporter, Andy. Thank you for keeping this podcast free for all people and supporting its long-term sustainability. Truly, it is the Patreon supporters that are making this happen. I have continued to train at Sauna Healing Collective, where we provide ketamine-assisted psychotherapy and psychedelic integration. And y'all, it has been so beautiful to train with them. Of course, as an intern in APA-accredited programs, you don't get paid for that. Let me just tell you, anyone who's thinking about becoming a therapist and doing the doctoral level training, for 3 years, you will train for no pay. And so that's currently where I'm at. So again, thank you to my Patreon supporters. But that being the system that it is, I have loved training at Sauna Healing Collective, and it has been such a life-changing experience to study psychedelic therapy and to learn more about it. And I've really enjoyed bringing that knowledge into these conversations with guests on the podcast where we can co-collaborate and learn together. And so for me, it is really important that these conversations stay free and accessible to all people, not put behind a paywall. So again, I just want to say a big thank you to Andy for making that large-scale dream of keeping these resources free possible. And I actually just presented a whole didactic training on sex therapy and incorporating everything I've been learning from psychedelic integration therapy. All of my Patreon supporters got to get a look at this design for the presentation in my post last month. It's your groovy turquoise and orange. Anyone who has seen the podcast website definitely knows the vibe of the content that I create. And it was so fun to explore this. Our set is so deeply influenced by our cultural context and relationships, right? We talk about the importance of set and setting with your psychedelics. Set being your mindset, right? What's going on up there in that big, beautiful brain of yours? In terms of sex therapy, right? We know that threesomes are the most common fantasy, right? That's been proven by research. And so when we think about the cultural context and relationships, right? For someone who is in a fundamental religion where fantasizing and dreaming about sex is a sin, that person might be struggling with the balance of this natural fantasy that is very normal and supported by research with their religious context. Whereas maybe you have this person who's wanting to explore their first threesome, right? That meaning making and that cultural context is very different for that person. Now, let's think about a throuple, 3 people that have sexual fidelity together. Right? Threesomes? Hey, that's their norm. That's how they have sex, right? So I don't think it's going to have that same sort of fantasy and experience that the person who's in a fundamental religion where they can't fantasize will have, right? What creates all of that set of our experience is the communities, the cultural context that we exist in, right? Psychedelics being similar. How are we understanding this drug experience? What does it mean for us to have this drug experience, as well as the meaning making we make of the drug itself or the threesome, right? And in terms of your setting, right, we're talking about where are you taking the psychedelic? Where are you having sex, right? Psychedelics and sex are these powerful, expansive experiences where we get out of our default mode network and we're able to find that flow state, ideally, right? Best case pleasure scenarios. Are you having sex at home with your beautiful lovers? Do you have the music going, the lights, the lube nearby, the box of toys? Or are you at the dungeon? Are you feeling that rush of the crowd looking at you, feeling your power as you harness their gaze? Or are you out in nature, feeling that warm sun touch your skin and the wind gently caress you with a soft, delicate touch? All of these settings are going to change your experience. If this is the first time in the dungeon, you're probably not commanding that scene, right? There might be a lot of nerves, all of the complexities of that. Are you having sex outside? What sort of bugs might be crawling around, right? And how can that impact your psychedelic experience of sexuality, right? Or are you at home and suddenly your phone starts to ring and it pulls you out of the moment, right? What is your setting for these experiences? And then, of course, we have to integrate, right? Tony and I talk a lot about the power of integrating our psychedelic experiences. And I also think it's really important to integrate our sexual and erotic experiences. I know a lot of people are like, what is integration, right? That's a great question. For me, when I think about integration, I think about, for example, the quote unquote psychedelic experience of when you get sick, right? Your whole paradigm is changed, your body, your mindset, you're sick, you're not feeling your normal self, you're in a different paradigm, a different psychedelic experience, right? The second that I'm sick, I'm immediately wanting to go back to my health. And I always say, damn, I didn't know how good I had it until I was here. Okay, so you've had this profound experience. What does it mean to now hold on to that when I'm healthy again and actually feel the gratitude of my health, right? Or even recently, I went out rock climbing with my friends and we all rock climbed up to this boulder in the middle of a canyon and got to watch the total eclipse. That is easily one of the most beautiful, remarkable experiences I've had in my life. You felt just the cosmicness of the size of the universe in that moment and how small you are to know that these two objects were coming together and how that impacts our world. I mean, wow. And then you get back to the city and you continue with your life. And what does it mean to actually hold on to that powerful experience and integrate that into my life moving forward? Psychedelics, same thing, these profound, beautiful moments. We hold on to them as templates of what is possible. Sex, these profound moments of connection, of love, of intimacy, of pleasure. We hold on to that and continue to dream as we move forward. Y'all, I love these combos of the sex and the psychedelics, and all of it really is the fact that it's about relationships. And Tony and I are going to hit on that again and again in this conversation. Who are you in relationship with? And in this podcast space is a relationship. I'm existing up in your head every Wednesday as I'm releasing these episodes. And I hope that you're enjoying it. I hope that you're growing. I'm certainly growing and learning and just having so much fun showing up in this space with all of you each week. And with that, know that I am sending you all of my love, dear listener. And I really hope that you enjoy this episode. Now, let's tune in. So then the first question I like to ask each guest is, how would you introduce yourself to the listeners?
Well, let's see. I wear many hats. So I think the stock answer is my name is Tony Moss, and I am a recording artist and music producer. And I am an also very strong advocate for the right relationship use of plant medicines and psychedelics.
Yeah, the right relationship. I'm excited to get into more of that and what that means for you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Could we maybe start there? Like, what does the right relationship mean?
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's potentially a really long conversation that is being had under different names, I think, all over the place these days. In essence, one of the things I noticed I started working with at least ayahuasca now 28 years ago. And one of the concepts I got introduced to through indigenous people is this concept of right relationship, meaning they understand their uses, they use it for those purposes. So in the West, since I think this is a result of not only the taboo, the quote unquote propaganda associated with the war on drugs, and also a culture that hasn't grown up with a lot of its kind of rites of passages and ceremonies intact, right? Everything has been commodified under capitalism. So you add that with this taboo, and we have generations of people that don't cognize what plant medicines are, don't understand them, and are completely out of what we call right relationship with them. So it's a no-brainer that we need something like what's being called a psychedelic renaissance. That's a whole other conversation. And there's this returning popularity to plant medicine work, and psychotherapeutic, therapies and so forth. Yeah, I would say we're in a nation this is happening all over the world, by the way, but I like to think of what we're calling Western democracy is the dominant kind of culture that's being exported all over the world. And what I see here is an ongoing pathology, right, that kind of permeates our culture, and a lot of neurosis that people are learning slowly, even though exponentially, that plant medicines and psychedelics can actually help heal. So having said all of that, right relationship is understanding the proper use of psychedelics and plant medicines, and then staying in right relationship with them. You use them for what they're intended for, even if that includes occasional tripping for mind expansion, right? But they're not abused and they're not quote unquote commodified, right? Meaning that they are just soulless commodities, void or, I would say void of their history and their traditional uses.
Yeah. I just released an episode with Irina Alexander, who's a harm reduction therapist, and we were talking about just the research on addiction and other sorts of pieces
Mhm.
like that. And I'm sure you're familiar with Johan Hari's research on the cage.
Amazing, yeah.
Yeah, that's always what I'm thinking about here in terms of the right relationship, right? Like, what's the cage that we exist in within this culture that is creating the sorts of conditions where we're having more chaotic use, right?
Yeah, and it's one thing to understand right relationship and just embody that as an ethos or a value. It's another to place it in the context of our particular culture and realizing that it makes perfect sense why we don't have it and we're not going to get there immediately. Yeah, because the right relationship piece of any culture has developed over generations, right? And again, the United States is largely void of that. So I feel like in a lot of ways, the 60s, as we know, although it put in motion this amazing kind of consciousness revolution that we're still, I want to say, benefiting from, or at least certainly in the throes of. These were a bunch of young people that were like without any, I mean, of course it went crazy, right? Prior to that, we didn't have things like Reddit and these various chat groups where
Right.
people could go online and kind of like, wait, what is this? And how do people use it? And what are the trip reports? Didn't exist. Also, no history of right relationship, or a lot of them they hadn't even heard of the things, except for maybe like, a friend, right? Or yeah, got dosed at a concert, whatever it was. So the difference between now and then, speaking about this renaissance, is now we have a whole generation of young people that are very smart, at least in terms of plant medicine and psychedelics. Not all of them, but as a whole, they do have access to research. And a lot of them are quickly realizing, like, whoa, these are really powerful substances. Like, there's all kinds of uses for this, including, like what happened in Silicon Valley. It's like, I'm more productive, go figure, right? I can be assisted with flow state. This helps with my meditation practice. This can help with my creativity. And I can do it and not, cause harm to myself and other people. This is what's new. That's the thing I call the psychedelic renaissance, not what we're actually seeing as, a typical colonial like takeover of traditional plant medicines.
Sure, 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 sure. And it's so fascinating to even see the research on how some people are trying to like extract the benefits from psychedelics without the actual psychedelic experience and that trip, right? They're trying to like see if we can pull out some sort of micro part of it so that we can still get the benefits without any of the hallucinatory like
Yeah,
parts. It's like, what?
it's comical in this sense. I never doubt that there are researchers out there and scientists who are literally looking at new generations of drugs and how to treat things. That as a given. The comical part is that we all know that are in this ethos, right? This, or rather, ecosphere of psychedelics. That what's really happening is that they can't patent the psychedelic, so they try to find a comparison kind of thing, and that they can market, put a lot of money into and make a lot of money on. And meanwhile, again, going back to what I said earlier with this right relationship piece in terms of rites of passages, once again, you take something that is really potent as a healing and transformational technology, remove the heart of that, which is what I think Western religion has done in general, right? You remove the heart of it and then sell it back to people as an empty placebo. Right. Yeah, so this is also part of the quote unquote psychedelic renaissance. It's this ongoing, just normal business as usual. Capitalism meets spirituality, meets transformation, meets plant medicine, meets indigenous culture, everything. Once they see that we are interested in it and there's value in it, let's figure out a way to distort that, own it, and sell it back to people in some way that so you get it and your listeners get it. And it's important to state these things when we have these conversations, because when I use terms like psychedelic renaissance, I don't want to give the impression that I am a huge advocate in celebrating it as a whole, right? We have to call it what it is. At this point, it started off, I think, as a renaissance and something that we were all excited about. It's pretty much become a marketing tool.
Yeah. Yeah. Like you said, here's more productivity if I do that, right? And I think we've always talked about set and setting, but I'm just more curious about the larger community setting that is important in that, right? Because there's research showing that, extremist groups can take have psychedelics and then have these experiences where they feel even more secure in their specific beliefs and,
Absolutely.
capitalism being one of them, right? And so just in
Yeah.
terms of this idea that the medicines and these experiences would bring us to this higher level of consciousness needs to be taken into that larger community context of what are the values that are getting reflected in the spaces where you are using, and what are the values of your community, because that's what's getting amplified in these
Yeah.
experiences.
And now we're talking a broader view of this concept of set and setting. Because as you just beautifully illustrated, one of the things that's been fascinating to me over the years is because I had such a profound, positive, only transformational experience working with ayahuasca in particular, I, of course, had this assumption as I started to advocate for that everybody would be able to have. And what we found really quickly, or I did, and then talking to other facilitators, is that you're just as likely to have your current story reinforced.
Yep.
And this is very challenging for the reasons you just brought up. Yeah, you can psychedelic. Well, let's just take LSD as just an example, a really small one, that you can take LSD for like super productivity. You can take it to enhance your learning ability. You can take it and have a profound spiritual experience, and you can take it to be a super soldier. Right?
Yeah. Say more to that.
Because in one case, you can trip alone or with a group of like-minded people. Most people take LSD to trip, and I don't discount the value of that on occasion, right? However, there is no intention for tripping, right? There's no group intention, meaning the difference between that, let's say like 10 people taking LSD or mushrooms out of the festival or running around the forest versus a ceremonial psychotherapeutic session where everyone is there for the same purpose, for some healing, some exploration, some transformation. And there's an intention for the ceremony, individual intentions are met, and that container, as we call it, that ceremony is being held from beginning to end to support that experience. So being in a group of people that are there for an experience like that, you're much more likely to have your current belief systems and assumptions challenged, which is good. That's part of the point, right? Conversely, as you brought up earlier, if you're in a ceremonial setting with a group of, let's just say hypothetically, fundamentalist Christians or white supremacists or a combination thereof, the chances are pretty good that you're just going to come out of that with an even stronger conviction, as you brought up, that your current belief system is not only correct, that is justified and probably even like spiritually, ordained and destined in some way. Yeah, and a lot of people in the world of psychedelics know this for sure. I think the important thing, that like the moral of that story is, which we all know at this point, is the importance of choosing your set and setting and the groups that you work with and the leaders or facilitators really carefully.
Yeah, it's scary when you think about how strongly that could be reinforced and where that goes. And I mean, to me, it's a reflection of the ways that, from my lens as a psychologist in training, I'm always thinking about how we are social creatures, right? And we exist in community. And so our reality is reinforced by the groups that we are around, right? So having a community where these certain values are, reinforced in large numbers, that's naturally where you're going to fall into. Hence the need for a diverse community of thoughts and thinkers and representation to be pushed out of your comfort zone, because the comfort zone is not always where we grow, right? So being able to be in spaces where people are actually going to challenge you and push you to think about different things is how this can be, such a transformative experience rather than one that, reinforces, potentially harmful views. It's really nuanced.
Absolutely, yeah. As you just brought up, whether you are going to, I'll say in this case, an ayahuasca ceremony, whether you're going for a personal healing, a transformation, or, some aid along your journey of enlightenment, all three of those still require being pushed to the edge, as you brought up, right? That's the point. Because you have to move beyond the current constraints of your psyche, constraints of your, social and moral and, political and all these different constructs. They have to be either kind of obliterated or at least pushed, into the uncomfortable zone so that they can be kind of recognized. That's the point, right? In some cases, completely let go of. Yeah, so if you're not in a setting that doesn't allow that, what you'll most likely get is a doubling down on your current belief system. Yeah, and I think of this often in terms of like, let's say the Catholic Church and the Eucharist. People use this example all the time, so it's not revelatory, but it's applicable. You've read or seen the book, The Immortality Key.
No, I haven't.
Highly recommended. It's called The Immortality Key. And it's a beautiful read that reads almost like the Da Vinci Code, but it's his actual journey to discover the history of psychedelic use in spirituality and whether or not the Catholic Church and the Christianity had its roots in, and the answer is yes.
Yeah.
Right. The point is, what we see most religions do is replace direct experience with ritual and eventually basically with dogma, right? So here we have this, if there was an initial Eucharist, an actual, sacrament taken so that a person could basically have the exact experience that Jesus talked about, which is like, my Father and I are one, you do work greater things than I, basically you and I are the same thing, heaven is within. So these are all, every single one of those is pointing to and referencing a direct experience of divinity. Then, of course, as we know, because the church was way more interested in controlling people and maintaining power, you take that piece out and you give people an empty ritual instead, right? And I think it's funny. I grew up, this is one of the reasons I was able to see this really early, was that I grew up both Baptist and Catholic. Right? So on my mother's side of the family, we were Southern Baptist, and I love Sundays at the church, right?
Sure.
And my father's side, they were Catholic. And by the way, I love the Catholic ceremony too. Hearing the choir and, Latin and the reverence and all of that was beautiful. The difference, though, was that I noticed at an early age, the goal of the Baptist church was to get people to sing and shout and have a direct experience. The goal of the Catholic church was don't act out.
Right.
It was the direct opposite. It's
yes.
Like, you can read about it, you can enact this Eucharist, this ritual, there's all this music and everything, but do not participate, really, and do not have a direct experience, like that's actually not for you. So we have these profound differences. So then we add on that later in life, I discover ayahuasca. I'm like, holy shit, talk about direct experience.
Yeah.
Blew them both out of the water.
Woo! Different level.
Yeah.
Huge pieces here. And for me, I was thinking about too, the ways in which living under these capitalistic structures, there's always this idea of producing, producing, producing. And frequently that gets transformed into the healing space, right? Where it's like you're healing, you're healing, you're healing, which is needed, but also like what does it mean to play and enjoy creativity, right? And so the person who does enjoy psychedelics, plant medicines, and goes to that concert and has that experience without an intention, which we can call an open intention, right, to see where it takes you and enjoy your moment, right? You have that moment where you're experiencing the psychedelic and you are connected to a large crowd of people that are all singing that same song, and you get the chills in your body as you feel that connection to something larger than yourself, and the music is moving you. And oh man, does that feel like what it felt like growing up in church?
Yeah, I've heard so many people, young people, talk to me about this very thing. And it was my first experience with MDMA, fortunately. Yeah, I went to my first, massive rave in LA, and I knew what MDMA was, wasn't really interested, but this friend had brought, I go, okay, let's do it, right? So we're kind of like hanging out. There's like 30,000 people, right?
Yeah.
And we're hanging out in the stands, watching everything. And this funny thing happened. So earlier on our way to the main arena, I bump into this young guy, and I just say, excuse me, keep going. And he pauses, he goes, hey, wait a minute. He goes and gives me a hug. Right?
Yeah.
It was like, we just didn't bump into each other and keep going. And I remember thinking like, what the hell is going on with these kids? And my friend turned to me and says, you're not where they're at. Because he knew they were all, right? Of course, he was absolutely right. So long story short, he says to me at one point, hey, if we're going to take this at all, it needs to be soon because it lasts a long time. Yeah. So we take the MDMA, we go down to the field, I'm dancing, the medicine comes on, exactly what you talked about. And this is the beauty of, you said, the open intention. Up till then, I thought I was like Mr. Spiritual Guy. I understood this concept of unity and connection, and we're all one. And there I was on the field dancing with all these kids who knew that already. And I suddenly had this huge, epiphany of like, holy shit, we really are all one.
Yes.
I am connected to all these people, and they are all beautiful, and I'm beautiful, and everything's great. And I know tomorrow the world will go back to being shit, but for tonight, and all of that's real, right? And I think people that don't understand the psychedelic experience, who criticize this aspect of it, that the quote unquote epiphany or insight doesn't last, they're missing the point, is that you have it, right? None of them last, right? You now have a reference point. You've gone to this place that is a somatic and visceral, real experience, right, of what's possible for yourself and other people and how to live on the planet. And that becomes a guiding post for you, right? It becomes like an axis. And I've met so many amazing people now, my age, who have told me like, oh yeah, my first experience that led to me living this life right now that allows me to be this incredible person that you're perceiving me as, all happened with an initial experience, right? So that's why early on I said, I don't knock the tripping experiences either. Even those these days can and should be intentional, right? But you can definitely just say, people write to me occasionally. I mean, not as many these days because there's so many trip reports online and people understand how to, I led one, as you know, through double blind, like how to trip sit. Yeah, I love this idea. Why I did this course was, I say it in the beginning, I think, my friend Sky and I, on one hand, it's because people are doing it anyway, so you might as well like harm reduction. We're really about that. Right. The other is, it's all about empowerment. Well, let's just take it back to its roots. This idea that you need a church or a minister as a mediator between you and self, you and cosmos, you and Christ, right? Now we could kind of get replaced in the new psychedelic Renaissance world of, at least where ayahuasca fits in, is you need a very experienced facilitator you do for the ceremony. I'm not knocking that, but you don't need anybody between you and the direct experience that you're going to have. Any good facilitator knows that. All they're there to do is to facilitate that connection, right? So the fact that people have access to various psychedelics, the reason we did the trip sitting course was I want to empower people. It's like, I go, this is your birthright. This thing that you potentially might experience in the next few hours is actually there all the time, right? So yeah, setting up the best possible container and possibility for you to have this thing that you're longing for, which we know can be an absolute life-changing, course-changing experience.
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons I do this work, you know?
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
for sure. I would say that my work with ayahuasca has given me everything,
Mm,
in this sense, peace of mind, a sense of self, deeper compassion, empathy, how to move in the world, a music, quote unquote, career, body of music and art that I'm really, really proud of, happy with. All of that and the relationships that I have in my life, all of that has come from this work. Prior to that, yeah, I don't know what I was doing. I wasn't like hating on life, I was moving along, but
sure.
it has so transformed and deepened and enriched my experience in life that, once anybody has that, you feel fairly committed that you want to help other people have it too.
Right, right, exactly. Spread the good word, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. And I loved how you talked about, I use the word template, right? We have these experiences on the medicine, on the drugs, and being able to know that that state is possible can be such a crucial thing to hold on to in our quote unquote ordinary states of consciousness, depending on what other drugs you're using, like
yeah,
caffeine, your SSRI, all these, ordinary states, whatever we want to
yeah,
define.
right.
But in general, just thinking about even, the integration of that, there's so many states of being where we just, blow past the realities of that in other ways, right? Like you get sick with an illness, and for, that moment you start to be like, damn, when I was healthy, that felt really good, right?
Yeah,
Or I go camping, right? And then I'm like, wow, that bed indoors is really, really nice. But then you go back to your house, and then you haven't camped for a certain amount of time, and then it's like, how do
right.
you continue to integrate these various psychedelic experiences of changing
Mhm.
our reality to carry them forward? So I think that's such a big piece of this, is how do we stay connected to it
Yeah, and
all?
you use such a great example about, none of us really appreciates our body until the slightest thing goes wrong.
Yeah.
And whenever you're lying in bed sick, part of you is like, can't even remember how good it felt to be
Yeah.
healthy. Well, this
Oh,
is what happens with the psychedelic and certainly a plant medicine experience because of the duration and the set and setting. There's this sense actually of like, oh, this is what this feels like. Yeah, I'd forgotten what it feels like to be actually healthy, right? Body, mind, and spirit. And yeah, when that ceremony completes, as you brought up, the most crucial part of all psychedelic work is obviously preparation is crucial, but it's all about integration. Yeah, and I remember seeing some article and some guy was like, almost kind of like denigrating, like, oh, integration. Everybody's talking about integration. I'm like, well, for good reason.
yeah.
I go, some things it's completely okay that they're popular memes. This is one of them. It's like, yes, let's talk lots and lots and lots about integration. Yeah. The
So
very
important.
fact that that is a buzzword is one of the positive benefits of the quote unquote Renaissance, right?
Right,
Yeah.
right. Exactly, exactly. And I know you mentioned that this changed your relationships. I'd be curious if you could speak more to that.
Yeah, in so many ways, all of your kind of psychedelic exploration and plant medicine transformation and healing, where the rubber meets the road is in your relationships, right? So everyone who does this work knows this, and it needs to be, or there's benefit in bringing it up every now and then. What's it all for if you're not a better person? And what I mean is, if by better person, I'm referring to how you relate to other people, right? Not building a bigger, better you, going forward and fulfilling your life's purpose and, accumulating more stuff and a better personality. Like, I'm not knocking any of that. I'm just being really clear when I say better person, we're talking about quality of relationships, how you are with other people. Everyone knows at this point, we only kind of exist in relationship with other people, right? And I think it was maybe Stanford, I could be wrong, I saw in a TED Talk, They had done this like 70-year study. Don't quote me on the specifics of this, but the essence of it I know is true. So they did something like a 70-year study, basically talked to people at the end of their life, and they wanted to like really nail quantifiably what actually matters to people. And they go, and the guy goes, and here it is, the big thing we've learned after the 70-year study. The only thing that actually matters to people when they're on their deathbed is their relationships, right? And of course, right, whether or not they were good, whether or not they were bad, the ones they screwed up, the ones that were good, where they loved, where they didn't love, I feel like, why wait?
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things we know is that a lot of the psychedelics, well, certainly the plant medicines, can cause the quote unquote death experience, meaning you get to that experience people talk about having at the end of their life. You can have that in your lifetime. And the Buddhists talk a lot about this. So like, you really don't live until you face death, right? Once you really face your mortality, then you can live a full life. Meaning instead, because almost everything you're doing, like they say in the Advaita tradition, is a distraction from death. It's actually you every day thinking that you're cheating death or avoiding it. The plant medicines can give you this experience that the Buddhists were referring to. It's like, well, why don't you just stop right now and face it right here, right now, right?
Yeah.
And boom. And in that space, you're like, and again, harkening back to this study, what you will realize if you really stop and get like, wow, in 100 years, I won't exist. Everything I own will be owned by other people or disintegrated or given away. And there's a good chance that no one's even going to be talking about me or remembering me. And, you know, when you get that, all it will matter to you is like, wow, yeah, love and relationships and quality of relationships and how I relate to other people. That's going to really matter. So to answer your question, that's I would say the most profound transformation that I've had working with plant medicines is emphasizing and showing up in my relationships in a way that feels good, right? Nurturing relationships. My friends and I occasionally use this metaphor of the garden. It might have come from a Rumi poem, I don't remember, but you can see your entire relationship kind of ecosphere as a garden. And each of those relationships is something that you've planted in that garden or is growing there, right? Regardless. And it literally is something that needs to be tended to. It's like, you know, all the bad shit, the rumors, the bullshit, the confrontations, those are the weeds and the fertilizer, right? But I keep those cultivated because you constantly want this garden to be this beautiful, you know, life-sustaining and life-giving, like, yeah, aesthetically pleasing, yeah, nurturing, all the things that a garden gives you. It's a really apt metaphor that is the way you can treat your relationships, at least the ones that are, you know, by choice, right? Because there are relationships that we get thrust into that we'd rather not, but we have to deal with. But even in those, I think, you know, you apply the same thing. It's like treat people with compassion, treat people with respect. You know, you can get in somebody's face and tell them to back off and still do it from a place of love and respect, right? You can defend yourself from a place of love and respect. You know, it's kind of going back to this idea of like the shoguns or, you know, like the Jedi metaphor. It's like never strike out of anger. It's like, yeah, you know, somebody's about to do you bodily harm and you've got a stick. Yeah, I'm going to take them out, right? I'm not a pacifist in that sense, but I'm doing it from a place literally of like, look, brother, you are clearly in an illusion. You've lost your way. And if you think I'm going to let you bash me over the head with that, whatever you've got without me defending myself, you got another thing coming. I love you, but right?
Yeah, love does not mean no boundaries, right?
And it's literally it. And boundaries take on different forms in relationships, and sometimes they're physical. You know, if you're in an abusive relationship and you know you need to defend yourself physically, it's like, yeah, that's a boundary. Now it just took on a physical, you know, what some people would say violent form.
Yeah, which I mean, to actually use violence to get people to wake up to the realities of climate change and you know, people will gawk at that idea, but it's interesting at the same time, the violence that is occurring to us, you know, that maybe we're not as aware of and the future generations and just all these ideas of what does it mean to be an activist in the space and to make change. It's so complex and so nuanced.
It really is, yeah. So going back to your question, complex nuance. The idea of relationship, particularly related to, I think where you were supposed to be maybe was on the, which podcast was that? The one with double blind on sex and intimacy?
Yes.
Yeah, all of this is kind of a preference for getting into that and how it actually relates. One of the most important things I discovered in terms of relationship, where it overlapped into sexual intimacy and any type of intimacy. And a lot of people are just now starting to really understand the profundity of this, is that almost any time you're intimate with another person in whatever way, what you don't realize and what plant medicine can give you is that you're actually bringing the inertia of your whole story into that intimate encounter.
Oh, yes, yes, you are.
Yeah, this is a really big deal because you don't realize at the time that most of your intimate encounters actually aren't authentic, intimate encounters in this sense. An intimate encounter, I think, ultimately, right, as you kind of progress and mature, and I think young people have kind of automatically, is this innocent encounter of the other, right? And this beautiful celebration of what it means to interact with sexually or otherwise with another being and explore, right? And if love is present, then love gets to manifest itself in this magnificent way, and it wants to. That's part of the attraction. That's why you're there in the first place. What people tend to do as they mature, as like with everything else, the way the brain works, is that encounter of the other, whatever it is, that full being and present of, in this case, another human being, gets flattened and dampened by preconceived notions, stories, past traumas, yada, 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 and on and on and on. You know, and that's what you're bringing into the intimate arena. And a lot of couples, I know this because I talk about it a lot in the work that I do. A lot of couples have told me that what the plant medicine work and psychedelic work has given them is this ability to like, holy shit, I feel like I'm actually with my partner for the first time. Like, yeah, me on the other side of my story about myself, my story about them, my body issues, my taboos, my morals and values, you know, my traumas and hurt, or you remind me of my father, and that's like, yeah, whatever the story is going on in your head, there's 1,000 of them sometimes at the same time. If you can remove all of that and actually be fully present to another being, true intimacy, what's possible in that space? It can remove this veil of like mediocrity, or as what's now being known as, you know, the reducing valve of consciousness. You know, Michael Pollan talks about that eloquently, I think, in his series. It kind of lifts that for a period of time, and your already always know thinking gets suspended, and you can actually be in front of another person and be like, wow, I thought I really didn't like you, but as I'm looking at you now, I think I'm actually kind of falling in love with you. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much
Or
there.
the opposite sometimes. I was under the illusion that I was in love with you. Now that I'm really looking close, I'm realizing I'm not in love with you. I
Yeah.
appreciate you, but actually, this was a whole story I had made up. It was a fantasy
Right.
bond.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I could just break down what you just talked about for hours, right? Because there's just so much packed up in that. And the feminist movement came into this field of psychology, which has its own laden problems, whatever. But the feminist, came into the field and started talking about how all of our dysfunctions and psychological distress is really related to relationships and our connection to them, as well as obviously the larger systems that impact us, right? And so there's always this paradigm in the therapy room of understanding like how patterns of relationships are showing up in that therapy room and in our lives, right? And so that becomes part of it. And so that's kind of what I'm looking for and thinking about. But then my existential professor is always telling me, no, we have existential freedom. Like to presume that we're constantly enacting these patterns in ways takes away our freedom to actually choose how we want to show up. And like, I want to hold space for that freedom we all have, but it feels inevitable at times when we're social creatures. We look to the world out, to how to exist. Getting to this idea of who you are innately is an interesting question, though, Tony, because it's like, where is the innate? Like the language that I'm using is taught to me from society. The ways that I've been taught to engage with you in this moment right now is from society. So like, what does it even mean to get to the oneness of the innate, right? And in RCT, they talk about maybe like the self in relation, which you talked about, right? So it's like, what does it even mean to get down to an individual self if it's always constantly in dialogue with relationships and systems and all these other things? But if we're talking about the oneness, that feeling that you have on the plant medicine, maybe that is what it is, right? That like we are all connected. This is something much larger than us, and that understanding of that. I don't know if you have more words for it, but at least in my own experiences, it's such a felt sense that's maybe ineffable in some ways, that connection.
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it. And it's not a conversation that is definitive ever once we start
Right.
talking about the nature of the self and what is that really,
Yeah.
right? Eloquently pointed out by you, it's like, can we even get to this innate self? My answer to that is maybe not, but we can certainly get everything out of the way that isn't, right? Only, as you know, to return to this a more elevated view that everything that you ever experience is it, right? And was it? But what that actually means to anybody that doesn't understand what I've just said is the whole point of going on a spiritual, quote unquote, journey towards enlightenment. There is a time when I think people would hesitate to say anything definitive, except for maybe, gurus, because it was, I think, at least in the West, the idea was that no one could possibly have any definitive answers about anything spiritual. And you certainly shouldn't say it in public because that would just
Mm.
make you foolish,
Yeah.
And we're in a different time period now, where both mystics and quantum physicists arrive at this really similar, as you know, juncture that, let's just say, for lack of better language, that if this innate self we're talking about, if you continue on a spiritual journey, and let's say whether it's psychedelic use, meditation, whether it's happening through the intellect or through a direct kind of somatic experience, the lesson that people keep coming back to, and now that quantum physics is arriving at, is that ultimately what we are is awareness, right? You are what is aware, right? And that's what I mean when I say, on one hand, everything that you do prior to a moment like that is just distraction. And you can keep weaving out of the way, well, I'm not that, I'm not that, I'm not that, I'm not that. You arrive at this place of like, oh, it's so simple. I had it all along. Like, yeah, I am what is aware of this entire experience. Then every single thing that you experience becomes all part of that journey, and it's all part of the self, and it's all, like you said, one. So it's just, I share that because this empowerment idea, again, this is something that is available to all people. It is at the core of all authentic mystic traditions. It's not a big, eternal secret. In the Veda tradition, they say, call off the search. That's what they're referring to. I'm like, look, like, you think that if you just continue to grimace your face and sit in poses and do things for the next 30 years, that you will alive it. We're trying to tell you that you can have it right now in this moment.
Right. It's
Right?
here.
Yeah, and the reason why that's so valuable is to dispel the myth that once you have a moment of authentic awakening, once you do have this moment of tapping into awareness itself, meaning suddenly what you are aware of is awareness itself, and like, holy shit, that's all. The beauty of that is that life just continues. It's the chop wood, carry water thing, and this is why it's so important. It's like, and getting back to what you're saying, it's like you will now continue to, deal with problems in the world and your own mind and the neurosis of other people and all of that. The difference now is that you have this new cognition, right? You have this broader view, right? And you might enter a sexual intimate relationship and realize, instead of just running on the tape that's playing, you actually recognize, oh, there's my tendency to want to do so-and-so, thinking that it will make this a fulfilling experience. Yeah, that's running, but now I'm not a victim of it. I'm not a slave to it, right? I can start to make some authentic choices here, which I think leads to something like closer to what we might call free will.
Mm-hmm.
When there's these debates going on about whether or not we have free will, the way that I cognize it is, because it's complex, is we do and we don't, right? If you're just running on all of your social conditioning, all the crazy neurotic thoughts in your head, you don't have any free will. Once you become aware of that, you can set those aside and you can actually make choices regardless. Yeah, now you've got some agency.
Yeah, until you run into the next thing that you're like, shit, I had no idea that I was still doing that, right? That's been my journey. I don't know about you, but it's like
Oh
you
no,
think you have
continuous.
it. And then it's like,
That's what I mean about, I have had the oneness experience. I have had the experience of looking across from another person and having absolutely no differentiation, like disconcerting that they were me. And I've had the deep, profound, both intellectual and somatic experience of seeing the world for periods of time from a place of pure awareness and seeing myself in that way. like just awareness, right? And then those things last for a period of time. They're ephemeral, right? And then you're back into, we'll just call it matrix of our existence. But now you've had this experience, and that's to kind of bring our conversation full circle. Now you have this new kind of access, right? This new point of reference. Yeah. So like everybody else, there's these days when I just have to like be like, oh my God, I'm so caught up in it. I need to like pull over and stop for a minute. Like my brain is completely taken over, and I'm the illusion of this particular story or thought process is dominating my experience. That's the way I would cognize it. The difference now, though, is that I can like catch it, yeah, either breathe through it or whatever tools are most appropriate at the moment, and like center myself. Okay, that was like a crazy neurotic pathological tangent. Like nice inquiry. Now let's get back to
Yes. And I'm always trying to talk to people about, the ways that that's, sure, maybe us and our monkey brain and what's going on, but also it's obviously the systems. We can't ignore the reality that we can have that piece of enlightenment, and then you have to go back to your job. You have to do this, you have to do that.
right.
We
And deal
can't
with other
just,
people.
yeah, and you can't just stay in that pure awareness all the time, because the systems, then people, like, oh, I struggle so much with my ideas and my mindfulness. I'm so bad. I'm so bad. It's like capitalism has gaslit you really, really poorly here. Like, I mean, this is the systems, right? And so also having that like compassion for ourselves in this process of the ways that it's so hard to stay in that, pure awareness, because we can't survive in that state here unless you maybe were Buddha and you came from money. And so you could sit under the tree all day. You know what I mean? Ugh.
Yeah, hearkening back to Michael Pollan, and he
Hmm.
himself acknowledges these aren't revelations. This is from his research, and in a lot of ways, him understanding what a lot of psychonauts understood generations before, this idea of the reducing valve of consciousness. He explains really beautifully why we can't walk around in this enlightened state all the time, right? Quote unquote. Yeah, and it's because of how the brain functions and the bandwidth that we have to be able to process the enormous amount of information coming at us 24/7, even as you and I are sitting here. Although this is audio for the listeners, I can see you, I can see your space. My brain wants to look at all the things in your room, process the colors. Oh, wait, I'm looking at a computer screen. Now I'm processing all the things in my room. If I really looked over at the fern hanging and I'm looking at the light shining off, oh my God, it just goes on and on and on. This is why we can't do that, right? It's like, yeah, I need to be able to focus on you or an aspect of you and maintain a consistent conversation. And as you said, get work done, drive, handle problems and upsets that happen in life. You're driving along, you hear the news, something terrible has happened, you're processing. Yeah, enlightenment in the way that most people think of it, this idea of oneness. And as I mentioned, becoming aware of the awareness itself, however you cognize it, or this, hyper connectivity to everything. We're just not designed to live in this particular world and function with that running all the time. And I think the reason it's important to share that with people is like, this is why it's beautiful to trip every now and then, or to have a ceremony, so that you can have a safe place to move into that, right? And be out in nature and walk around and like, okay, but I know I can't always do this, but today, yeah, I'm definitely like, yeah, removing that valve and just letting everything come in. And it's beautiful. And like you said, then the next day I got to go to work.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. But I think it's also interesting because it kind of depends then on how we define mindfulness, presence, awareness, right? Because when we think about like Thich Nhat Hanh, he talked about how, that awareness can come into the actual moment of peeling the orange, right? So
Absolutely.
in some ways, like we are in that heightened state when we're locking eyes right now and talking, and we're present and we're right here. So it almost then becomes like, how do we define what awareness is and that state?
Yeah, you nailed it. And this is just, again, it's kind of like this idea of free will or not, in the sense
Right.
of you can cultivate, there is this ultimate awareness and sense of connectivity and oneness that you cannot kind of physically function in this sense that, like I said, there'd be no differentiation between you and I, right? And we're just a, no, it's like, this is amazing, life is a miracle. Then what we have evolved to, and what is really profoundly beautiful and possible, is what you're bringing up, which is mindfulness. It's taking that awareness, our ability to be aware, like really to actually like bring awareness to it and bring it into everything. And although, any number of things can trip you up on that, you can be really, really successful. I would probably say, like, realistically, I'm like a good 75% of the time, I'm in this state of bringing awareness to my activities, right? In terms of a mindfulness practice and bringing together right relationship and what we talked about in intimacy, I start each morning with kind of a tea ritual, not in a traditional sense ritual, meaning, okay, I've got all these amazing tea cups and teas, and my day starts with bringing my full awareness. Right relationship starts with which thing am I drinking and why? Because each one of these teas is a plant medicine in reality. Oh, what I think I need this morning is the matcha tea with mushrooms for this particular reason, right? And I'm choosing this cup and I'm choosing this teapot, and not because any of it matters, but because I can bring my full awareness to every single action. That is a beautiful way to start off the day with a mindful meditation. It doesn't require you to sit on the edge of your bed and move into a mindful meditation.
Right.
Yeah, and then once I'm kind of in that space, I might watch the news. And the reason is because I actually want to watch the news not as a commodity and content, right? I want to actually like what's going on in the world today relative to this particular news that I'm watching. And I want to bring my full awareness to it. Like this is fucking pain and suffering happening over here. People are doing this and that. Oh, this is happening with the climate. This is how it affects me. This doesn't require my attention. That does. This is just gossip. That isn't. You can do that when you're really aware, as opposed to it just kind of passively being omitted or edited by the reducing valve, right? Yeah. So the point of all that is what you brought up. The awareness piece is super important to everything that we're talking about, in that there's an ultimate version of it that we don't function with on a daily basis. But that, again, access point, that point of reference becomes the whole point of wanting to bring awareness into your everyday actions. And eventually there's no difference. That's what Thich Nhat Hanh and others are talking about, is that you can live. That's why I think we go from awareness to the concept of mindfulness, right? You can cultivate mindfulness to the point where you are mostly aware, right? From a conscious, aware point of view, like being mindful at any given moment throughout the day of what's actually happening. And you're not just running on the inertia of your trauma, pathologies, conditioning, neurosis, and story of your neighborhood or culture or country, right? All of that is in context. And that's what I mean by, in that sense, I think you have more agency. And there's something closer to what we're calling free will, meaning like because you're in this aware place, you can actually make choices, right? And that aren't just feeding, let's just call it a neurosis or a pathology, or responding.
Yeah. If we can ever see that, if we can ever get out of the water, right? If it exists, right? Because then it's just like, how
Yeah,
deep is the water that we don't even see in front of us? And that's,
exactly.
yeah, it's so
Yeah.
tricky. But I mean, these are the conversations that I love. We get some psychology, some philosophy, some spirituality in there, and ruminate on all of it.
Yeah, I love it too, for this reason, because none of it is definitive, but it doesn't mean
Right,
we can't talk about it. And one of
right.
the reasons I'm willing to go to those extremes sometimes is like just letting people know these are completely okay and welcome conversations that we can be happening, right?
It should
Like,
be.
yeah, it's like this reality, quote unquote, is ours, right? It's such an important message. It's like it's yours, right? A lot of people are co-opted into thinking that it isn't, but it's like this is something that either whether you conceive of it as something that we created or something that was given to us as a gift by a creator, regardless, or it's a simulation, right? This is where we're existing. And how beautiful to just kind of sit with other people and like fucking talk about it. It's like,
Mm-hmm,
well, let's
mm-hmm.
talk about this piece of it. Let's talk about the philosophical piece. Maybe it's this, maybe it's not. Maybe I think, yeah, these are really beautiful conversations that we are empowered to have. And a lot of people don't realize those conversations are the things that were eclipsed and taken from us with the, not all, but with the dominant religions, right? The whole idea was you don't even have the right to explore those ideas. That's heresy. We have figured it out for you, right? And you will live by this particular dogma. You will have these particular thoughts, or we will crucify you or burn you at the stake.
Yeah. Yes. And the field of psychology falls into that same sort of dogma often. But
Mhm.
leaving that aside, And the research has shown that we can't multitask as much as we think anyway. So at least for
Right.
me personally, I've found so much benefit for my own mental health to actually just try to stop doing that as much as possible in my life, right? Like, how can I focus on this one thing that is before me, and the ways that that has just changed my mental health and general well-being is huge.
No, I mean, I'm glad you brought that up because I would say this is something important to talk about. Plant medicine, psychedelic work, it's most powerful in conjunction with other tools, right? And so this idea that you will go to an ayahuasca ceremony, for instance, reach a state of enlightenment, you might, right? But then somehow your life is fixed, quote unquote, or that from this point on, you're going to walk in the world a different way. The people that really have had life-changing transformational experiences, again, in my case with ayahuasca, are people that are doing other kinds of transformational technologies and tools, right? What you just brought up is like crucial, this ability, crucial, learning to focus, right? Learning what flow state is, like all these various things, when people use this term, young people particularly lately, over self-mastery, like, yeah, self-mastery is mastery of the mind. That's what it's referring to, right? And even if they're looking at quote unquote like Jedi training, right, as they refer to it, you're still ever talking about the mind, okay? So all the tools you can bring into your arena, into your kit, that help you, as you said, to like focus, those things transformed my life. I didn't realize how scattered and unfocused I was until I remember my teacher was quoting someone else, a teacher of mine, not my teacher.
Yeah.
He said to me, he said, your focus is like a laser beam. There was something about that actually went in and I got it. And I realized what he was saying, and it's like what the Buddhists are saying, whatever it is you do, do. It's like, if I'm going to sit and focus on a spreadsheet for a particular project, rather than take 3 hours and blah, 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 actually just focus 100% on that thing, give it your full attention. And then you're amazed at what you can accomplish.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So as in your work, same thing goes whether you're, exploring a particular topic, piece of artwork. My mindfulness thing in the morning with the tea, which I'm not always successful with, by the way.
Right. We name that.
Right. But the point is, like, I want something that starts my day that puts me into the kind of framework, right? The framing my day with waking up my mind and bringing it online into focused awareness.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's
Yeah.
plenty of time throughout the day for all the daydreaming and scattered thoughts. I don't want the impression that your goal every day is to like walk around with this hyper focused face, right?
Right.
Like, yeah, the great creativity and advancements in both science and art and humanity have also come from daydreaming. Right? But even that is being in a focused, if you think about it, kind of flow state.
Right. Because we can't just live always in the now. If you want to build something,
Right.
someone goes to grad school, you have to think about the longevity of that. You can't just stay right here. So that nuance of both. And I loved what you talked about in terms of the intentionality of it and these practices. And you had named the Buddhist practice of reflecting on death. That's one of my favorite ones, is to like start the day and trying to actually think about that, to feel what that feels like. And even that perspective, and you had named it right, of remembering that I'm going to die and there will be many humans, hopefully climate change, that will live after me, and that there were so many humans that lived before. And when you hold that perspective in your life, it really changes how you move throughout your day, and makes you, I think, seize the moment in a way that completely changes your life. And that, and even just journaling, has been such a profound practice for me, to like sit down with a piece of paper and write just one page about, what's on my mind and where do I want to direct my mind to in terms of today.
I mean, I would think, the most important thing that can come out of any of these conversations, certainly ours, is a version of what you just shared, that I think the most important thing a person can retrieve or discover from any kind of spiritual transformational work, in this context, psychedelics and plant medicines, is what you just said, that you get how valuable your time is on this planet. And you get that you're going to die. Even with life extension, let's say we get to the point where we can live a healthy 200 years, there's still death waiting for you. Right?
Yeah.
And this is not a bad thing in this sense. I think that the interesting duality and paradox of this epiphany of awareness of death is that it can send you into kind of an existential crisis of nothing matters, therefore I should just, accomplish nothing, just hang out and wait to die, right? But that's not the point of it, as you know. The point is like, yes, nothing ultimately matters. Therefore, what are you waiting for, right? Why not seize this opportunity, this incarnation, and live a full life and go for it? Explore it, create, find out what it is. It really, as Joseph Campbell says, turns you on, that brings you bliss, right? And automatically with that, it's like, yes, and help others remove themselves from suffering and relieve suffering in the world. You said, well, why would that matter? The whole thing's gonna, everyone's gonna die and the sun will eventually explode. I'm like, because again, we're talking about our experience, this reality that is ours. Are you okay with a world that is filled with unnecessary pain and suffering? Or do you want to participate in a world and leave one for the next generation that has less pain and suffering, right? I think this is really, really valuable because it goes back to what we talked about earlier, is that it all comes down to relationships, right? Even if you get, well, when you get, let's say, the mortality piece, and you can actually, without fear, contemplate on the idea that you one day will not exist in the way that you think of it now. With that comes this quick realignment of your values, right? One, you can become motivated and put on fire in terms of like, wow, life, I have this life, yeah, let me go for it. And whether I'm out winning an Oscar award or a Nobel Prize, or whether like you're sitting in your room and you're contemplating the beauty of your couch and your relationships and the gifts that friends have given you and this piece of art that you bought, it's all the same, right? What's happening is you're starting to really open up into appreciating the quality of your life, the quality of the time that you have. And with that, which is what a lot of people have been telling me about lately, which is interesting, this has been a theme, is that they realize like, one of the things I'm discovering is that I don't have time for drama anymore. Right? And they get like, this is from like their ayahuasca work. It's like,
Sure.
I'm realizing how many times I have been saying yes to things in the past that I don't actually really want to do. Or I find myself in situations where I'm not actually really enjoying or comfortable. And although there are times we all have to do things we don't want to do, most of them we have control over, right? So I think this is something really valuable. You start to contemplate like, yeah, what do I want to do every day? Since it ultimately doesn't matter and we're all going to, die at some point, and therefore it's amazing and my time is really precious to me. How do I want to spend it today? Yeah, so this death piece of the psychedelic work and of the spiritual journey transformation work is one that everyone will arrive at. It's just part of the package of it. And I always say it's interesting. It's the thing we're always running towards and away from, as you know. It's like, I think we enter the spiritual journey at least subconsciously thinking that what we will discover at the end of that is heaven, and we do. But what's standing at the gate of heaven is death. Right? It's just meaning that's the portal you have to go through.
Yeah.
And there's no way around it. Right?
And so then creating that heaven in your day-to-day now, right? That reality now, that reminds me of the four agreements of talking about that, of like creating the pleasure here and holding the realities that, the presence and your awareness of this, and the gratitude that comes with the finiteness of time also includes the pain, right? I think that's something that happens frequently in the spiritual spaces where it's like, gratitude, I'm so grateful, I'm so grateful, I'm so grateful. I can't have any space for like pain and sadness, which are also such crucial parts of the human experience. And even getting to hold, gratitude for that pain
especially in the West, because pain and
Yeah.
suffering gets in the way of productivity and shopping.
Yeah. And well, that's the other thing is when we look at this world and we know that 45% of the world's wealth is owned by 1% of the population, that's a global problem. And I don't know how we just like sit with that fact. Like 45% of the world's wealth is owned by 1%.
This is the we're all over the place in this conversation, and at the same time, it's all cohesive.
Yes.
That is another example of this brainwashing of a particular culture through, in this case, media, right? That people accept that as normal and okay and just how it is. And when you really stop and think about it, you realize how pathological, I keep using that word because that's what it is. You realize how crazy that is.
Yeah, it's gaslighting. It's wild.
Completely. And everyone really has this idea that, because these particular people own these companies or whatever it is, it's the same, I look at that as a continuation and an evolution of like the monarchies, where people were under the
Yes,
illusion at
Tony.
some point that the king was actually ordained, like he was by bloodline or by decree of God, he should rule. Now we have the same distorted pathology that the self-made man, that somehow because these people are from this particular family or they own these companies, that it's justifiable that they own 45% of all the, it's not.
Well, yeah, and they're all white men, and I think that's where it's interesting, right? Because you talk about the oneness. We're all one, but that white man had a very different experience in this reality with very different privileges that not all of us got in that
Had
oneness
privileges and
sense.
access to resources
Yeah,
and not self-made,
yeah,
born into and
right,
maintains a system, right,
right.
that keeps this particular system in place. I don't think we're talking about an individual feeling like they're empowered to take on that system and change it. I think what we're talking about is people waking up from that as normal, right? Right. And then people waking up from that and realizing, like, wait a minute, what's happening?
Yeah, yeah,
This is
Tony.
ridiculous.
Yes, it
And here's
is.
this example. It's like, let's just, as an example, it's hypothetical. I have nothing against Bill Gates as a person. I've never met him, right? But this idea from this lens, right? So here we have Bill Gates, and because he owns Microsoft and because he's made these investments, that it's okay for him, his net worth to be some, whatever it is. I'm hypothetically say $160 billion, right? The alternative story is just as plausible, that you live in a culture where the reason people achieve all of these accomplishments is because that's what there is to do, because it's fucking badass to do it, and because society benefits. And in this particular cultural paradigm that I'm about to make up, oh, there's this thing where you can make as much money as you want to up till $1 million or $10 million. Beyond that, none of the money is yours. It goes back into the general pool for other innovation and other people to create cool shit with. And you have nothing to worry about because nobody else is making more than 10 million either. So you've already made it. You can relax. Now, what can motivate your choices every day is like being at Burning Man. What cool shit can I create just for other people to enjoy? What aspect of the human condition in terms of suffering can I put my creative and intellectual talents into, my
Mhm.
resources, my team, whatever it is? You get the point. I think people will be motivated to play the game, right, of
Yes.
life and humanity. And it's something that I call, species consciousness. I think you move from an individual, my story consciousness, my particular tribal consciousness, my nation consciousness, into humanity consciousness, species consciousness, where what we are concerned with every day in this utopia that I'm painting is always the next generation. Can we make sure everybody have their needs met? Do all of the young people have opportunity? Because any one of them could come up with the next thing that changes the whole paradigm.
Mhm.
All young people are educated, equally amazingly across the planet. And when they turn, let's say 18, we send them on what we used to call the grand tour. For 2 years, you get to travel the world, meet all the people, every nation pays for it. And at the end of that 2 years, we want you to kind of, okay, now that I traveled for 2 years, I want to focus on this for the next 3 or 4. My point being that those are just as plausible realities for us to live in, right? That do not require this current system, which literally capitalism, as you know, thrives on scarcity and competition.
Mhm.
It's false, right? And it's
Mhm.
manipulated, right?
Mhm.
And we accept it because it's what we're born into,
Yeah.
right? Well, I once heard many years ago someone say something to this effect, that democracy and capitalism as we see it, as it's actually practiced, not conceptually, it says, oh, it's amazing. It's the most successful prison ever created because people don't know they're in it.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. And the more that we wake up to that, I think collectively we know that there's more people at the bottom of that pyramid than the top. And so finding ways that we can collectively change to a new paradigm. I mean, welcome to modern anarchy, Tony. Here we are having the conversation.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought this up, because when you first contacted me, I remember my first thought was like, I don't know that I have anything to say about modern
Oh.
anarchy. That was followed with, oh, yes, I do.
Yeah, you do. And we hit it. We hit it. It was
Well, everything I
so
just shared
good.
is my take on what
Yeah.
we can actually identify these specific problems. We can wake up from the illusion and see what's actually happening and respond to it. That's modern anarchy to me, right?
Mhm.
It's not just I'm against everything and I'm a rebel. It's actually a state of consciousness, modern anarchy.
Beautiful.
And I would say expanded consciousness, yeah, or at least potentially so.
I love that. I love that take on it, and the ability to dream, right? The ability to dream, to get excited about that revolution and that alternate world that could happen. And I really appreciate you coming on to the show and sharing about that dream with me and talking about it and the importance of relationships and how relationships are so crucial to that, right? And
Yeah, otherwise, as we said earlier, bringing it full circle, everything we've talked about, what's any of it for if it doesn't ultimately impact how you show up for other people?
I know we've talked about so much, and I have a closing question I ask each guest, but I also like to hold space before I go there in case maybe there was something we didn't hit that you would like to say to the listeners directly. Otherwise,
Oh,
I
no,
can
you
guide
and I have
us.
covered, I think if I could think of anything at all of value to share with other people, we covered it.
Yeah, yes, we did. Good. Well, then the one question that I ask every guest on the show, Tony, is what is one thing that you wish other people knew was more normal?
Oh, absolutely. We touched on it already. A direct experience of what they are referring to as God, a direct experience of oneness, a direct experience of divinity. I'm just using different words to say the same thing, that it's not something that needs to be mediated by another, and it's not something reserved for a select few. That's the one thing I wish more people and that everyone knew, right? That it's your birthright, it's yours, and it is in fact who you are, and it is just waiting to be recognized.
Yeah, and I continue to believe that God, divinity, is love. As
Mhm.
cheesy as it sounds, there we go, you know?
Yeah, and it's okay. And it's the thing. I think the reason these things are cliche is because they're actually true. It's just because you've heard it over and over again and it's been abused and it's been memed out, right? But
Right.
in the end, face it, it's a great place to end. It's like I remember being in a rave early on, that's what I was talking about, and there was this young guy sitting in the middle of the dance floor on his knees, and he was just cracking up, just laughing,
Mm,
clearly having some like internal, epiphany.
yeah.
And that moment, I remember something that it might have been Eckhart Tolle, who might have been quoting someone else. He said something to this effect: when one really wakes up, the most common response is laughter.
Yeah. Such a great conversation with you, Tony. I really appreciate you co-creating this conversation together with me today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Definitely
Yeah.
a delight. Yeah.
Yeah. Is there anywhere you want to plug for that people who are connecting with you and your perspectives to find you and reach out?
Yeah, I don't have much of an online well, this is not true. I'm discovering that I have a bigger online presence than I knew. But I do maintain a website just to kind of make announcements of things. And it's just my name. It's tonymoss.me. Yeah, and but links to the music and everything that's going on in my life, I tend to put there at some point, and people can also contact me through that if they would like. Yeah, but don't expect it to. I'm not a content hound, so now and then something will.
Totally. Of course, very understandable. Yeah. Well, thank you, Tony, so
Thank you.
much. If you enjoyed today's episode, then leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen to your podcast. And head on over to modernanarchypodcast.com to get resources and learn more about all the things we talked about on today's episode. I want to thank you for tuning in, and I will see you all next week.